We live in a world that rewards strength and punishes vulnerability. People smile when their hearts are breaking, laugh when their minds are tired, and say, "I'm fine," when they are anything but fine. But why do we do this? Why do so many of us feel the need to hide our pain behind a mask of normalcy? The answer lies deep within human psychology, in our survival instincts, our fear of rejection, and our desperate need to belong. When someone experiences emotional pain, especially in childhood, they learn quickly that expressing feelings can be risky. Maybe they cried once and were told, "Stop being so dramatic." Maybe they tried to talk about their sadness and were ignored. Maybe they learned that being quiet keeps things peaceful. So, over time, they build an invisible wall, a smile that hides sadness, jokes that hide anxiety, silence that hides fear. They become experts in the art of pretending. Every "I'm okay" becomes a little performance, not because they want to deceive, but because they want to survive. Psychologists call this emotional suppression, the act of pushing down emotions to protect yourself. It's a defense mechanism that works in the short term, but destroys you in the long run. When you constantly pretend to be okay, your emotions don't disappear, they just sink deeper. These people walk through life carrying invisible weight. They overthink every word, every look, every reaction. They apologize too much, they say yes when they want to say no, and they always seem to be fine. But behind that calmness is exhaustion. Not just physical tiredness, emotional fatigue. Because pretending takes energy. Smiling takes strength. And being normal, when your world is falling apart inside, takes everything you have. Still, they keep going. Because deep down, they hope someone will notice. Someone will look into their eyes and say, "You don't have to be okay right now." And in that moment, the mask might finally start to crack. At the root of pretending to be okay lies one of the strongest human emotions, fear. Not fear of danger or failure, but fear of being rejected for who we really are. Humans are wired to seek belonging. Our ancestors survived because they were accepted by their tribe. Rejection meant isolation, and isolation meant death. That ancient wiring still lives in us today. So, when someone fears emotional rejection, when they believe that showing sadness or weakness might push others away, they wear the mask. They say, "I'm good," when they're breaking inside because the idea of being too much terrifies them. They fear that their sadness will inconvenience others, that their anxiety will make people uncomfortable, that their pain will make them unlovable. Psychologists describe this as learned emotional avoidance. If someone opens up once and is met with coldness or judgment, their brain records that moment as danger. Next time, instead of opening up, they shut down. They smile instead. They joke instead. They distract themselves. This pattern becomes automatic, almost like breathing. Pretending feels safer than honesty. So, they slowly build a double life, one on the outside, one inside their mind. But here's the cruel paradox. The very thing they do to protect themselves, hiding their true emotions, becomes the thing that isolates them the most. Because connection only happens through honesty. And when honesty is replaced by performance, loneliness begins to grow silently. People who pretend to be okay often say things like, "I don't want to bother anyone. I'll be fine. It's not that serious." But what they really mean is, "I don't think anyone will care if they knew the truth." And that belief, though false, becomes their reality. They become invisible, not because the world can't see them, but because they've learned to disappear behind the word fine. To understand why people pretend to be okay, we must look inside the brain. This isn't just emotional, it's biological. When you experience stress or pain, two main parts of the brain respond: the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is your alarm system. It senses threat and activates fear. The prefrontal cortex is your rational side. It decides how to respond. For people who have faced emotional neglect or trauma, the amygdala becomes hypersensitive. It fires even when there's no real threat. So when they think about expressing emotion, their brain screams danger. They suppress instead. This constant suppression triggers the body's fight or flight system. heart racing, tense muscles, shallow breathing, but there's no release. Over time, this leads to emotional burnout. They stop feeling things fully: joy, sadness, excitement. Everything becomes muted. Psychologists call this emotional numbing. It's not that they don't care anymore. It's that their mind has shut down to protect them from pain. What's more, these people are often extremely empathetic. They feel everything deeply but don't want to burden others. So they absorb everyone else's pain and keep their own hidden. In therapy, when such people finally start expressing their emotions, it's like opening a dam. Years of repressed feelings come rushing out: fear, anger, guilt, grief. It's overwhelming, but also liberating. Because pretending may protect you from temporary discomfort, but it costs you long-term peace. The mind can only hold so much before it begins to break down. You might not collapse physically, but you'll feel it in sleepless nights, in constant fatigue, in the quiet sadness that never leaves. Healing begins when you stop pretending. When you let your prefrontal cortex, your rational self, tell your amygdala it's safe to feel. That's when your nervous system can finally rest. It's not always easy to notice who's pretending. The people who act the happiest often hide the deepest sadness. They smile easily, they make others laugh, and they always say, "Don't worry about me." But behind those smiles lies quiet exhaustion. There are small signs, subtle patterns, that reveal the truth. They might be the friend who is always available for everyone else, but rarely opens up about themselves. They listen carefully, give advice, and comfort others, yet never talk about their own pain. They may keep themselves constantly busy, studying, working, cleaning, doing anything to stay distracted, because stillness scares them. Stillness means they might have to face their feelings. When you look closely, you'll notice. They often laugh when they're nervous. They avoid eye contact when asked, "Are you really okay?" They cancel plans at the last minute and say they're just tired. They use humor to hide sadness, the kind of humor that feels a little too sharp, a little too real. Their online presence can be deceptive too. Perfect photos, motivational quotes. But in private, they avoid messages, ignore calls, or suddenly disappear for days. That's not rudeness, it's emotional fatigue. Psychologists call this emotional masking, the act of using positivity to hide pain. It's common among people who grew up needing to be the strong one. They believe that if they crumble, everything around them will fall apart. You might also notice physical signs: trouble sleeping, forced smiles, long sighs, eyes that seem distant even when they're listening. Sometimes they talk about deep topics in a detached way, as if describing someone else's life. And yet, when you really pay attention, you'll see it. That tiny pause before they answer, "I'm fine." That forced smile that doesn't reach their eyes. That silence that lingers a second too long. They are not looking for pity. They just want understanding, the quiet kind. Someone who sees through the mask without forcing it off. Because the truth is, when someone pretends to be okay, what they really want is a safe space to finally stop pretending. To exhale. To be real. To be seen not as strong, but as human. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is notice the ones who always seem okay, and remind them that they don't always have to be. Pretending to be okay might protect you in the short term, but it comes with a heavy price. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. When you suppress emotions for too long, your body begins to absorb the pain. Psychologists call this somatization, emotional distress that manifests as physical symptoms: headaches, fatigue, chest tightness, digestive issues. The body starts to express what the voice never could. Over time, emotional suppression also leads to disconnection, not just from others, but from yourself. You stop recognizing what you really feel. You confuse numbness with peace. You start thinking, maybe I really am fine, even when deep down you're not. This disconnection can also destroy relationships. When you pretend for too long, people start believing the mask. They think you're always strong, always stable, always in control. So when you finally fall apart, no one understands how bad it's been. They're shocked because they never saw the signs. Another cost is emotional burnout. You give so much energy to maintaining appearances that nothing is left for actual healing. You go through the motions, wake up, work, smile, sleep, without ever feeling alive. People who live this way often describe life as gray. Not painful, not joyful, just empty. That's what psychologists call emotional flattening, when the highs and lows disappear, leaving only indifference. And yet, beneath that emptiness, the soul is screaming for rest, for authenticity, for someone to say, you don't have to pretend anymore. Pretending also creates guilt. Guilt for lying, guilt for not being strong enough, guilt for needing help. It's a cruel loop. You pretend to avoid guilt, but pretending creates more guilt. To break the loop, you must realize pretending was never your fault. It was survival. It was the only way you knew to stay safe when expressing emotion felt dangerous. You learned it to protect yourself. But what once protected you is now holding you back. True healing begins when you forgive yourself for pretending. When you stop saying, I'm fine, and start saying, I'm human. Healing doesn't start with a big revelation. It begins quietly, the moment you allow yourself to feel. The first step is honesty. Be honest with yourself before you're honest with others. Admit that you're not okay right now. Say out loud. Write it down. Feel what you've been avoiding. Psychologists call this emotional validation, acknowledging that your feelings are real and deserve space. You don't have to justify them. You don't have to make them smaller. You just have to let them exist. The next step is self-compassion. Stop treating yourself like an enemy. You did what you had to do to survive. You wore the mask because no one taught you it was safe to remove it. Forgive that version of yourself. They were doing their best. Healing also requires connection, not with everyone, but with someone. One safe person who listens without judgment. It could be a friend, a therapist, or even a journal. Vulnerability feels terrifying at first, but it's the only path to authenticity. When you finally express your truth, the real, messy, imperfect truth, you begin to rewire your brain. The amygdala learns that emotions aren't threats. The prefrontal cortex regains control. Your nervous system relaxes. You begin to breathe again. You don't have to stop pretending overnight. Healing is not a straight road. There will be days when you still say, I'm fine, even when you're not. That's okay. Progress isn't perfection, it's awareness. One day, you'll wake up and realize you're no longer wearing the mask. You'll smile, not because you have to, but because you feel light again.